General Hospital will reveal when Sonny realized that the custody battle between Michael and Willow was escalating to a dangerous level. He knew that this was no longer just a disagreement between two wounded souls navigating heartbreak. It had transformed into a deep fissure that threatened to splinter his family beyond repair. The tension was no longer limited to courtroom proceedings or whispered accusations, it was seeping into every corner of their lives, casting a long, heavy shadow over their relationships, trust, and future. Sonny, though still recovering from heart surgery and contemplating retirement, found himself pulled back into the fray, not as a mob boss, but as a father who could no longer watch his family unravel from the sidelines. After a particularly tense conversation with Willow, in which she firmly claimed that Michael had refused to see her during her trip to Germany, Sonny was immediately struck by a sense of disbelief. That version of events didn't sit right with him. He knew his son, flawed, yes, but heartless, no. The idea that Michael would knowingly deny Willow a chance to speak, especially about something as sensitive as custody of their children, contradicted everything Sonny believed about him. His instincts, sharpened over years of betrayals and backroom deals, sensed that the truth was being buried beneath carefully constructed lies. But Sonny also knew that storming into the situation without evidence would only create more chaos. He had seen what impulsive moves could do, how they often played into the hands of those manipulating events from behind the curtain. So instead of confronting Michael or Willow directly, he took a quieter, more thoughtful approach. He turned to someone who had no agenda, no reason to lie, and whose heart still beat with unfiltered innocence, Wiley. Sonny believed in the purity of a child's honesty. In the afternoon light of a quiet Port Charles park, he found Wiley playing alone near a sandbox. Sonny approached, not as an interrogator, but as a loving grandfather. He knelt beside the boy, matching his gaze with patience and warmth. There was no tension in Sonny's voice, only curiosity and love. And as children often do when they feel safe, Wiley began to talk. What Sonny heard shook him to his core. In the simplicity of a child's retelling, the entire conspiracy began to unravel. Wiley spoke of how Drew had been visiting his mother often, how those visits would sometimes end with Willow in tears, how she'd spoken in hushed, hurried tones with a man Wiley described as mean to Daddy Michael. The pieces were disjointed, an overheard sentence here, a vague emotion there, but Sonny's mind, ever alert to hidden meanings and motives, connected the dots. Wiley even recalled a night when he heard Willow say that Michael doesn't need to know she came to Germany. That one line echoed in Sonny's mind like a gunshot in an empty room. It was damning. It was proof that Willow and Drew had been hiding something deliberate and deeply unethical. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was deception, and it had been weaponized against Michael during the most vulnerable time in his life. Sonny sat in silence for several moments after Wiley had finished, struggling to contain the storm of emotions inside him. Rage at the manipulation, sorrow for his son, and disappointment in Willow, someone he had once welcomed into the family. But more than anything, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Michael had been hurt in more ways than one. Not only by the explosion that scarred his body, but by those who were supposed to support him as he recovered. Sonny wouldn't let that go unanswered. He knew now that if he wanted to protect Michael, he needed to act, not with brute force, but with precision. And he needed to make sure the truth would come out in a way that couldn't be spun, denied, or buried. Sonny's next move would be calculated. And when the moment came, it would change everything. Willow had unknowingly handed him the leverage he needed by involving a child in her secrets. And Sonny, a master of power plays, now held all the cards. Willow never imagined that the carefully constructed illusion she and Drew had built, layer by layer, lie by lie, would come crumbling down at the hands of a child. Yet that was precisely what happened. Wiley, in his innocence and honesty, became the unsuspecting force that shattered everything. The mask Willow wore, the narrative she had so cautiously shaped, The choices she had justified under the guise of maternal love and protection, all of it dissolved the moment Sonny confronted her with what he had learned from his grandson. There was no room for denial. No deflection, no spin. The truth, simple and undeniable in its delivery from the mouth of a child, pierced straight through her defenses. Willow was paralyzed by fear. Her entire body tensed under the weight of exposure. She tried, at first, to grasp for an explanation, some thread of justification that could soften what Sonny had laid before her. But there was none. Every word Sonny repeated from Wiley's account was like a nail hammered into the coffin of her credibility. The truth she had hidden from Michael, the visit to Germany, the manipulation surrounding it, and the lie that he had refused to see her, was now no longer a private deception but a looming public scandal waiting to erupt in court. The shame came rushing in like a tidal wave. What once had felt like loyalty to Drew, a shared bond in navigating the complexities of Michael's recovery and custody negotiations, now seemed grotesque in the full light of the damage it caused. She had not only broken Michael's trust, but had weaponized his trauma and his children in a strategic move to win. And worst of all, she had involved Wiley in a conflict he never should have been anywhere near. Fear quickly followed shame. Willow understood that if this reached the courtroom, and it surely would, the repercussions would be catastrophic. The judge would see her as complicit in deception, and her credibility as a mother would be forever compromised. More than that, the family she had fought so hard to be part of, the Corinthos family, would see her not as a victim. Not even as a misguided woman, but as a manipulator who had betrayed the father of her children and used Drew to execute it. In that moment of reckoning, as Sonny stood before her with a cold certainty, Willow made a decision born of desperation and the last flickers of conscience. She chose the path of least destruction, the one that might still salvage something of her relationship with Wiley. With trembling resolve, she relinquished full custody to Michael. She asked only that she be permitted to see her children on a limited visitation schedule. Still wanting to be present in their lives but recognizing that she no longer had the moral or legal high ground to demand more. The decision sent ripples through Port Charles. News spread quickly. And the courtroom that had once seemed primed for a long and bitter custody battle was stunned into silence. No dramatic trial. No drawn-out legal strategies. Just a simple declaration: Michael Corinthos would assume full custody of his son and daughter. The court formalized the decision swiftly, acknowledging the new evidence and Willow's voluntary concession. Michael, for his part, was overwhelmed. After months of struggling through pain, physical, emotional, and spiritual, he found himself standing on steady ground for the first time in a long while. And at the center of that newfound stability was Sonny. The man who had once been estranged from his son. The man whose judgment Michael had questioned more than once, had emerged as the very person who pulled back the curtain on the truth and gave him back his family. The gratitude Michael felt toward his father went far beyond words. Their past was complicated, marked by pride, betrayal, and misunderstanding. But this act of protection, of advocacy, bridged the gap between them in a way nothing else ever could. Sonny had not only fought for him, he had fought for Wiley's future. And in doing so, he preserved something sacred, the innocence of a child who no longer had to carry the weight of adult deceit on his shoulders. Sonny didn't revel in victory. There was no smugness in his voice when he informed Michael of Willow's decision, no triumph in his eyes when Drew's manipulation was finally exposed. He had done what needed to be done, for Michael, for Wiley, and for the family he had spent his life protecting, even when it meant confronting his own. For Sonny, this was not about winning. It was about restoring balance. About ensuring that a child would grow up in a home free of games, secrets, and emotional blackmail. In the aftermath, Willow withdrew from the public eye. She became quieter, less involved in community affairs, and distanced herself from the Corinthos family. It wasn't exile, no one had formally cast her out, but she knew she had no place among them anymore. She focused on rebuilding herself privately, showing up for her children when permitted, and making peace with the choices that had cost her so much. Drew's fall was even more pronounced. Once seen as a symbol of resilience and redemption, he now faced not just public scrutiny, but legal consequences for his actions. His reputation lay in tatters. And even his allies began to distance themselves. Carly, once sympathetic, now saw him as a danger to her grandchildren. Jason, when he learned the full scope of Drew's actions, turned cold and remote. The damage was done, and it would take more than apologies to repair. But amidst the wreckage, something enduring had been reclaimed. Michael, once nearly broken by betrayal and heartache, stood tall as a father with a renewed sense of purpose. And Sonny, scarred but resolute, proved once again that when his family needed him most, he would rise, not as a don, not as a figurehead, but as the quiet force of justice that no one saw coming until it was too late. When the truth finally came to light, Drew found himself cornered, with nowhere left to hide. What had once been a calculated strategy, meticulously executed, delicately layered in half-truths and manipulated perceptions, crumbled almost instantly under the weight of hard evidence. The courtroom, which had for weeks been a stage for ambiguous claims and character testimony, suddenly shifted into a place of reckoning. The judge, armed with Sonny's sworn statements and a stream of newly surfaced revelations, wasted no time in reopening the case files. The allegations, once whispered in side halls and private chambers, now took center stage under the unforgiving glare of official scrutiny. And Drew, once seen as a beacon of resilience and a man who had triumphed over his tortured past, fell from grace in a spectacle no one could have foreseen. The revelations were damning. Sonny's discovery that Drew had bribed a German nurse to hide the truth about Willow's attempted visit to Michael, while he was still undergoing painful recovery from the penthouse explosion, shattered the case's moral compass. It exposed the malicious intent behind Drew's actions, to isolate Michael, to emotionally manipulate Willow, and ultimately to gain favor in the custody battle through psychological distortion. These were not simply legal missteps, they were acts of profound betrayal, masked as concern for the children's well-being. The court's response was swift and unyielding. Drew's legal team, once confident in their narrative, faltered as evidence mounted and the perception of their client shifted from heroic father figure to conniving strategist. In a matter of days, Drew lost more than just the battle for legal custody. He lost the court's respect, the support of former allies, and the fragile goodwill of a town that had once rallied behind him during his return from captivity. Port Charles, a community known for its short memory but deep moral pulse, began to turn its back on him. Even those who had stood by him in darker times, Carly, Jason, even Monica, found themselves questioning who Drew really was, and what else he might have buried under the guise of redemption. Meanwhile, Willow's fall from grace was quieter but equally significant. She had built a reputation as a devoted mother, a woman who had endured tragedy and transformed it into quiet strength. But in aligning herself with Drew's deception, even if unintentionally, she had tainted her own narrative. The pride that once defined her evaporated, replaced by guilt and a sobering awareness of how far she had strayed from her values. The fierce confidence with which she had once navigated courtroom proceedings gave way to silence, regret, and retreat. She withdrew from the public eye, stepping away from the spotlight and the social circles that had once embraced her. When she did see Wiley again, during the supervised visits allowed under the new legal agreement, there was a subtle, unmistakable shift in the dynamic. She smiled, held his hand, read to him the same books he used to love, but in his eyes, she could see it, the light that once reflected her presence had shifted. That light now shone for Michael, the parent who never left, who never lied, who fought every day to return stronger, more present, and more committed than ever. And though Wiley's love hadn't disappeared, it had matured. It now carried with it an unspoken understanding of trust, one Willow knew she would have to rebuild slowly, if ever. Michael, in contrast, stood renewed. The court had not only granted him full custody of Wiley and Amelia, but had done so with a clear acknowledgement of his integrity and perseverance. He didn't need to humiliate Willow or seek revenge on Drew, the truth had done that for him. His focus remained unwavering, on his children, on healing. On creating a safe and honest environment where love could flourish without manipulation. His victory was not legal, but personal. It was the triumph of endurance. Of staying true to himself when everything around him threatened to pull him into the same spiral of deceit. And none of it would have been possible without Sonny. For all his history, all his flaws and dark associations, Sonny had once again proven why he was more than just a name whispered in fear. He had not wielded power through intimidation this time. He had acted as a father, as a grandfather, and as a man with an unwavering commitment to truth. His instincts had pierced through the lies. His investigation had uncovered the rot. His courage had given Michael the path to justice. And his presence, even when understated, had changed the course of everything. The moment Sonny confronted Willow and later revealed the evidence to the court, a domino effect began that not only dismantled Drew's case but exposed the broader danger of letting unresolved emotional agendas drive decisions about children. Sonny's careful orchestration of information, supported by Wiley's unfiltered honesty, served as a reminder to everyone in Port Charles that truth, however delayed, was still the most powerful weapon in any battle. In the final ruling, the judge stripped Drew of all rights related to the children's education, healthcare, and legal guardianship. Willow was permitted limited, non-intrusive visitation rights under court supervision, contingent on counseling and regular behavioral assessments. Michael was granted full parental authority. The decision sent a clear message: deception, no matter how well disguised, would not be tolerated where the welfare of children was concerned. As the Corinthos family stepped out of the courthouse that day, a sense of cautious relief settled over them. The months of tension, suspicion, and heartbreak had not been in vain. Sonny walked a few paces behind Michael, not seeking recognition, but content in knowing he had fulfilled his role. Not as a don, not as a shadow figure, but as a father whose greatest power was in never giving up on his children. For Port Charles, this chapter marked a shift. The power dynamics that once centered around secrecy and manipulation were starting to crumble. Honesty, long dormant beneath the surface, was finally being rewarded. And for Michael, this wasn't just the end of a custody trial, it was the beginning of a new era. An era built on the truth his father had fought to uncover. And the unconditional love that had always defined the best of the Corinthos legacy.